What's up, everybody? I hope you're doing well today. I'm going off script. I had a whole video scripted about something unrelated to this video, and I just really felt like talking about something else. So we're going unscripted today. Buckle up. There are some concepts that I feel like don't get as much airtime as I at least think they deserve. And so today I wanted to talk a little bit about DARVO. If you haven't heard about DARVO, I'll explain what that is in a bit. And connected to DARVO, I wanted to touch on whistleblowing a little bit as well. One of the reasons why I want to talk about DARVO is because it is so common in harmful relationships, particularly if somebody is a perpetrator of some sort of criminal activity or a narcissist or both. They love using DARVO. So I'll explain a little bit more later in this episode why I felt like it was important to talk about DARVO, but first let's talk about what DARVO is. DARVO is an acronym that was first introduced by Dr. Jennifer Freyd in the 1990s, and it stands for Deny, Attack, and Reverse Victim and Offender. I'm going to read this quote directly from Dr. Freyd's website describing DARVO. Quote, DARVO refers to a reaction perpetrators of wrongdoing, particularly sexual offenders, may display in response to being held accountable for their behavior. DARVO stands for Deny, Attack, and Reverse Victim and Offender. The perpetrator or offender may deny the behavior, attack the individual doing the confronting, and reverse the roles of victim and offender such that the perpetrator assumes the victim role and turns the true victim, or the whistleblower, into an alleged offender. This occurs, for instance, when an actually guilty perpetrator assumes the role of falsely accused and attacks the accuser's credibility and blames the accuser of being the perpetrator of a false accusation. So most often, DARVO shows up only when somebody's being held accountable for some sort of wrongdoing. Let's say in this example, somebody in your workplace took credit for work that was actually yours. Let's say you call them out and you say, hey, that work that you took credit for, I actually did that. The first step that they will take is to deny. Say, oh, that's not true. I did that work. And the way DARVO operates is sequential. Like if you back down then you're good. It all returns to this sort of problematic equilibrium. Like as long as nobody's calling them out, then the perpetrator or the narcissist or whoever is sort of leaning into DARVO tactics is not going to use those tactics. It's only when they're getting called out in some form. But let's say, they deny it and they say, no, that was my work. And you say, well, no, hold on. I have receipts for it. Let me show you the emails or the proof or the evidence. Then that's when they'll pivot into attack mode. It could be attacking your character. Like, well, you've always been mean to me, or kind of like you've always had it in for me, essentially diverting attention away from whatever it is that you're trying to call them out about. But it can take many forms, and the psychological effects of it are devastating. Most of us will break down and will back down. Like it's highly effective. And so if we back down at this point, then they will never need to turn to the reverse victim and offender tool. That's the third aspect of DARVO. But it's those of us who really stick to our narrative and say like, hey, no, I still really need to hold you accountable for this thing, or I still really need to hold my boundary that you're pushing against. Then that's when we see the RVO part of DARVO show up. So if you are somebody who's non-confrontational, you're very compliant, you don't want to stir the pot, you may never witness DARVO from an individual who utilizes DARVO as one of their frontline defense tools. If you stand your ground, you stick to calling somebody out, even moving through their denial and attack phases, then you will witness when somebody's using DARVO, they will turn to the reverse victim and offender phase of DARVO, where essentially they paint themselves as the victim and you, the person who's holding them accountable to something, is the offender. You are now the perpetrator. And this is exactly what we see when somebody files a defamation lawsuit. If somebody says like, hey, somebody committed this criminal act against me, and then they come back and they file a defamation lawsuit, that is the RVO of DARVO, reverse victim and offender. I didn't do anything wrong. You are trying to defame me. You're in it for the money, and you're just trying to attack an innocent person over here. Look how much good I've done for the community or our household or fill in the blank. They'll start to elevate themselves as, let me show you all the evidence of how wonderful a person I am. DARVO works for the perpetrator most of the time, unfortunately. When somebody is perpetrating against that victim, it is most common that it takes a long time for it to get out, because either it takes a lot of bravery to build the confidence to blow the whistle, or they had tried blowing the whistle and the person has used these DARVO tactics over and over again, amongst other tactics, to cover up whatever harmful behavior they're engaging in. And it's highly effective, highly successful. So they've managed to keep it under wraps oftentimes for decades. I mean, we've seen this play out so many times. I think of like Larry Nassar, who just got away with blatant, out in the open abuse for decades against hundreds of young girls. I mean, there's so many examples of this, unfortunately, of just time passing and the perpetration continuing over and over again, whatever the harm might be. It doesn't just have to be criminal level of acts that this comes up for, but usually there's some sort of harm underway that they're trying to cover up. One of the many reasons why I want to talk about DARVO today is what can happen as an outside observer when DARVO is at play, whether you're the therapist, you're the coworker, you're HR, you're the jury listening to the trial, whatever it might be, is often the true victim of the story is somewhat bought in to the DARVO tactics of the perpetrator. They might start devaluing their own narrative or minimizing, did I maybe misunderstand that uncomfortable advance? Maybe I'm just too sensitive. Maybe I misinterpreted that situation. Maybe I'm misremembering how that scenario played out. Maybe I even have hard evidence catching them red-handed for whatever it is I'm calling them out for, but maybe they didn't really mean it that way, because look at all this evidence that they are a good person, or they've helped me in all these different ways. They've cared for me. And so the person who is the victim in the story may also be aligned with the person who's harming them, or at the very least, second guessing their own testimony. And so as the observer, if let's say it was a therapist meeting with a couple and one partner is demonstrating DARVO tactics against the other party, we may actually align with the perpetrator, thinking like, look, they seem very clear on what happened. The other person, the victim, seems pretty wishy-washy and unsure. So it's hard to know if we're going to buy into that individual's testimony or what they're saying happened. And so we can start to see the victim as the offender as well, or at the very least as not a very reliable witness. As a society, we are very ill-equipped to deal with DARVO when it's happening, and as a result, it makes it incredibly difficult for victims to come forward and stand their ground, call somebody out, name what's happening, because society is often aligning with the offender. I'm using the term offender loosely. It could be somebody who's engaged in criminal activity, or it could just be somebody engaging in emotional harm that's not necessarily criminal. It's so much easier to buy the offender's narrative and discount the victim than to realize that somebody was so capable of crafting this level of manipulation and like holding them accountable to it. So because of our lack of awareness on the individual level and as a broader society about DARVO tactics and what they look like, then it's one, far less likely for victims to blow the whistle, and two, for those who blow the whistle, there are significant negative impacts on their well-being. Because of the way things are currently set up, we tend to have to go through a significant phase of hardship, mental health issues, decline in our relationships. We get isolated because our friends and loved ones don't believe us. We get discredited. We get shoved under the bus. Like, people really shame us for it. Interestingly, there's an entire government website dedicated to talking about whistleblowing at whistleblower.house.gov. And they have this publication that I'll link to below called Whistleblowing and Mental Health. They say, quote, whistleblowers face significant psychological, financial, and even physical threats, often by the very institutions they are trying to protect. So according to this publication, here are some common forms of retaliation against whistleblowers. One is workplace reprisal. They say, quote, employers often resort to can never say this word. Machiavellian. Did I say it? Resort to Machiavellian tactics to make an example out of the whistleblower. Retaliation may include administrative leave, termination, or banishment from one's career field, gaslighting or bullying, negative performance reviews, removal of job duties, retaliatory investigations, security clearance suspension, and removal of employment benefits. Now, of course, this is all related to employment, but you can kind of catch the DARVO vibe in there. Another common form of retaliation that they note is criminal and civil liability. Quote, whistleblowers are often treated as if they have committed a crime for exposing a crime. Employers may file retaliatory civil lawsuits, e.g. defamation, or a referral for criminal prosecution. And the last form of retaliation they highlight in this document is personal attacks. Whistleblowers are often subjected to public smear campaigns by their employer to try to discredit them and distract from their disclosures. And then they go on to say mental health impacts of whistleblowing. Quote, the whistleblowing experience can be isolating and traumatic. It may lead to post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, and thoughts of self-harm. It goes on to say, it is important for whistleblowers to practice self-care and develop a community of support through experienced legal counsel, whistleblower advocacy organizations, trusted peers, loved ones, and mental health experts. Oh, hello, mental health experts. That would be us. Yes. When I'm preparing my clients to either, call out a family member for harming them or a loved one for harming them, or submitting something to HR at their workplace because something happened in their workplace that shouldn't, or any kind of whistleblowing activity that they might be interested in, I always try to educate my clients in advance what they might be dealing with, what they might be stepping into, not to discourage them from whistleblowing, though they have the freedom to choose out of it as a form of self-preservation if they want to, but so that they can step into it fully equipped and that they don't lose their stamina, they can keep their well-being intact, they can feel armored up, suited up, have whatever supports they need at the ready because they know they are stepping into actively getting attacked when they whistleblow, unfortunately. So I think it's really imperative not only that we're educated in DARVO tactics so that we can help our clients identify it when they're caught in it, help our clients identify it when they're deploying it, though that might be a little harder to see unless we're witnessing it like in couples counseling or group therapy or something like that right in front of us, but also so that we can equip our clients to blow the whistle in a way that they can feel really well supported. I kind of have a high horse on this one. There is so much work we have to do with this because not only do we have the data of the whistleblowers that are out there, but we know for every one person who blows the whistle, there are so many other people who've been through the same kind of harm or worse, who have never said a word because of all of these variables that we're talking about and then some. So I think if we can create a pathway where it feels easier to identify this kind of harmful DARVO dynamic when it's at play, and a pathway to help people be equipped to hold their offenders accountable, then we could really be doing a service to society as mental health care clinicians. It feels like very valuable, important work. And it's something that it's in our wheelhouse. We can help people with that stuff. So it's important that we can see it too. Now in this episode, I'm not going to break down all the details of like how to, detangle or respond to DARVO. There is information available out there on anti-DARVO tactics. So I'll link to some resources below if you're interested. I know some people listening are going to be identifying their own experiences of like being DARVO'd, and some of you might just be equipping yourselves for how to support others when it happens or identifying it when it happens to them. And there may be some who can catch that they've utilized DARVO themselves. And if that's you, kudos to you. If you've tended to deny and then attack and then make yourself into the victim, better to know about it, and it's never too late to work on it. It's okay. Well, this was kind of a serious topic, I'm not gonna lie, but it's definitely something that I think deserves more attention. I'm not the expert on DARVO. I have lived through it many times. And I've also walked a lot of clients out of DARVO or walked a lot of clients through the whistleblowing process, which it is a beast. So that's my exposure to this topic, but I'm not an expert. And so I'll link to a lot of resources below. As always, this is not clinical advice. I'm just sharing knowledge. So just take it for what it is. And before we close, I'd like to thank therapynotes.com for sponsoring today's video. Therapy Notes helps with all of your practice management needs, from scheduling to notes to billing. They have a HIPAA-secure telehealth platform included for free for all users, and so much more. And they're even rolling out some new features pretty soon, so I'm looking forward to seeing those. If you'd like to check out Therapy Notes, you can get 2 months to try it for free with no commitment just by clicking the link in the description of this video. Well, thanks for joining me on this kind of detour, because I scripted a whole thing and then something in my gut just said, like, not today, Marie. We're going to talk about something else now. So thanks for hanging with my detour, and we'll, I guess, go back to our regularly scheduled programming next week. And if you are in a scenario where you are being harmed for whatever reason and you feel like you can't blow the whistle or you can't get help, you can't get out, I will link to resources below. There's always a way out, and there are resources to support you even when it feels like you're totally alone. And on that note, until next time, from one therapist to another, I wish you well.